while we're waiting for everyone else, I will just let everybody here know, one, so appreciative that you are spending the time with Eric and I this morning. Thank you for being here. We will be having this as a conversation. So Eric's going to be presenting, but if at any time you have questions that you'd like to ask or comments, please feel free to come off mute, or if you want to put them in the chat box, I can also speak to those to Eric as well. So whatever you're comfortable with. We really want this to be a resource for you personally. If you're a professional in a space that works with people in the conversations of death and dying, we want this to be a resource for you professionally. So anything that we can, and I say we, but really Eric's the expert here, can help with, we're just glad you're here and know this will be informative for everyone. I think we'll just go ahead and get started, Eric. Is that all right with you?
It's great.
Okay. Well, briefly, I just wanted to introduce, I've met a few of you, but a few of you I have not, so introduce myself, and then I'll give a brief introduction to Eric, but let him introduce himself as well. My name is Kylie Bandy. I am the founder of After Loss Advisors. We provide concierge services to people who are looking for support with end-of-life logistics. And what that means is really helping people on the front end to do their legacy and estate organizing. So we're kind of looking at the business side of things. So their accounts, their digital password management, their legacy wishes, things like that. And then on the post side, after a family or a person has experienced a death, we can step in to support executors, family members, and navigating all of those logistics as well. So similar to what I mentioned before, the digital side, account passwords, and also connecting with other professionals like Eric and Gitit and people who can support these families as they're going through things. So that's a little bit about me. And to introduce Eric here, Eric is a wonderful person and a new friend of mine. So I'm so excited for him to be here today. He has a farm in Lakewood that we were just talking about earlier, Half Moon Farm, that I'll let him speak to because I think it's an incredible project and an incredible resource to people in the community. He is also the founder of nonprofit Regeneration Earth that helps to educate the public and us about death options and support, and he also supports families in need. So he's doing incredible work in this space, and just so grateful that you're here today, Eric. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm seeing some names on here. Alexis, your name came up last night in conversation. Good to see you. Jenna, I was just thinking about you last night. Kelly, it's good to see you. And all of these strangers know that I'm here speaking from my experience, and I will do my best to support you going forward. And so no matter where this conversation leads, it generally can last for days and days because we're all excited and energized to talk about this space and how we can show up for one another. And so find peace in knowing that you have a resource ongoing, not only with Kylie, but also with me. And so kind of the format that I will go into is I'll share a little bit about myself and how I got to where I am at right now. And then really what I would like to review today is why Colorado is the leader in the United States of America in autonomy and dignity in when it comes to death and dying. We truly are the leader. And that will be changing. As some of you may know, there's some new legislation that's being proposed, and it's really important that we understand what the proposed legislation is, so that we can understand what autonomy can look like going forward, so that we can be clear on how we can continue to serve the public. And so I'll talk a little bit about Colorado and its specialness, and then I'd love to open it up, as Kylie said, to y'all with any questions. And so knowing the type of learner I am, I wouldn't be able to really continue paying attention if I didn't get my question out. So pop it into the chat, write it down. I really want to make sure I get to it, and we'll go from there. So thank you all for investing your time today in being here. I'm going to be 35 soon, and most of the time people say, "Wow, Eric, you do so much." And really what it comes down to is I just care. I really care about the earth, and I really care about people. And looking back over my life, when I was younger, I never really was satisfied with what brought most kids joy. I didn't really spend much time on TV or video games. I was really out in nature. I was exploring things. I was playing in the lake or in the creek or flipping over rocks to see what types of salamanders were around. I was observing nature. And in 2015 is really when I began my entrepreneurial journey, and that was through floral design and commercial and residential plantscaping. And what I still do to this day is I improve people's spaces with plants. You may or may not agree. I have a little bit of a green thumb. And really what it is care. It's observing something, a living organism, understanding what its needs may be, and being willing to be courageous enough to step into that space and try it out. And it's the same thing I do in being a death doula as well. In 2019 or 2018, I was teaching an incense making workshop. I was teaching how to grow different herbs and different plants in your garden, how to cultivate them to bring them into your home use for spiritual or religious practices. And in that group was a woman who asked me to come on board as a conservation advisor in a water crematory. And I thought, a water crematory? What the heck is that? And I got excited, right? Because when we first start talking about death, and for many of you on this call, it still excites us in some way. And so I was like, I would love to learn more. We got coffee and went out to Portland, Oregon to understand what they were doing with water cremation and came back here to Denver to open up along the Front Range. Meanwhile, I was listening. I was listening to the community. I was listening to hospice and palliative care workers and social workers. I was listening to nurses and CNAs, and I was understanding that there are quite a few gaps in what we know or what we don't know. And so that's how I got to where I am at now, is starting Regeneration Earth, which is a nonprofit around education and really empowering people with choice and understanding that, hey, if you've got a loved one dying of a terminal illness in Louisiana, they do not have the options that we do here in Colorado. However, it doesn't mean we can't get your loved one here safely, and it doesn't mean that we can't offer them the Colorado laws and procedures once they're into this state. And so I like to work with things like that. I bought this farm that I'm sitting at in 2020. It's called Half Moon Farm. And I've held all sorts of celebrations of life here. We've had viewings. We've had a lot of people return to the earth here. I have returned over 200 people to the earth here in the form of human compost or essence from water cremation. And so I think oftentimes people are like, wow, that's a lot of bodies. There are no bodies here. No bodies here. There is just compost and essence from water cremation. And working with the cycle of life and understanding this Japanese term, shoji, shoji, that there is no difference between birth and death, except for right now. And it's quick and it goes like that. And so that's why I'm here. I'm here to educate and I'm here to empower folks. And I'll start with a little bit of a story. And this is a new one I'm telling. And so we'll see how it goes, because oftentimes in public spaces, I usually tell a story about Irene, but some of you have may heard that story. So I'm going to tell you a story about Susan. Susan and I met as a death doula about 4 months ago, and I got a call from a social worker who said, hey, I heard that you have a private residence where folks can come in to take their MAID medications, medical aid in dying medications. And I said, that is true. And they said, well, we would love to talk more about with you, with you about your processes and kind of the space that you hold. And thus began my journey of being a doula for Susan. Susan was 74 years old, and Susan was diagnosed terminally ill with PSP. And if you're not familiar with PSP, it's similar to Parkinson's. And so over the past 4 months, I've had the absolute pleasure of visiting Susan every Tuesday. And I started to get curious as a death doula and as an entrepreneur and as a human being in general. I'm working on listening more and speaking less. And some of you may know I hold these death dinners. We hosted one last night and it was fantastic. It always fills me up. But really what we talked about was listening in the face of love. Oftentimes we want to give our own advice and so on and so forth. But when I work as a death doula and I take off my hat as a farmer, listening is so empowering. So I began to listen to Susan. What were her wants? What were her fears? What was she curious about when navigating the end of life system? And maybe what was she concerned about what was going to happen after, not only with her body, but maybe her assets? And how can we make sure that we're delivering the most amount of peace so that she can really relinquish and let go when it comes time? Some of those things were silly. And I said, Susan, understanding that she had already had her MAID medications, I like to get clear. And Susan, when do you want to die? And she said, well, when is the Kentucky Derby? And I said, it's Saturday, May 4th. And she said, fine, Sunday, May 5th. So this weekend, I had the pleasure of taking Susan to the Kentucky Derby here in Denver. We threw her a huge party with way too much champagne, vodka, and Merlot, and we had such a fantastic time. They gave her a shout out on the big screen, and she was celebrated. Really, in this way that everybody should. And oftentimes, as a death doula, we say, what a privileged death. And I hope that we can get to a space where deaths don't need to be categorized as privileged, that that's just what death is a privilege. It's a privilege that we can have time with our loved ones. We can listen to our loved ones. We can have a living funeral where the individual is present and we can share with them how much they meant to us in this life or whatever it may be. So we had this massive celebration. And on Sunday morning, 48 hours ago, Susan came over to my home to die. And we invited 16 family members over to celebrate her before she crawled into bed to take her medical aid in dying medications. And her last words were, gosh, this tastes like shit, as she was drinking her medications. She had a bowl of strawberry ice cream after, and her heart stopped 2.5 hours after that. And most people say, wow, how do you do this? And it's because I just care. I'm not some holier than thou where I'm able to kind of release this. I care and it's on my heart and I'm thinking about her. And I'm thinking about her family in these days afterwards. But what I do know is that Susan had autonomy and she had dignity. She was able to understand that she was not going to get better from her terminal illness. And so she took the opportunity to educate herself and her family and to make a choice. And so many times people say, I wish I would have known this sooner. And so what I do is I spend time in the community educating folks on what their rights are so that we don't have to say, I wish I would have known this sooner, so that we can, of seemingly healthy bodies, make plans now so that when the time comes for our bodies to transition out of this life, everything's ready to go, that we can release and relinquish anything that may have held us back. So that's a story about Susan. It was really beautiful. Visiting her on Tuesdays, I was able to offer her Reiki. 2 weeks ago, I went and cooked her one of her last meals. I made her a steak and Caesar salad, and we did have some Merlot. And I found out after she died, as we're all sitting around her, holding her hands and giving her kisses, that she had an incredible Caesar salad dressing recipe. And I said, you know what? I'm upset I didn't know this because I would have made it. But her brother texted me yesterday, and now I have her recipe. And these are the things that energize me. These are the stories and the legacies of our communities that I hope that we can cultivate, not only with our own family units, but with the people that we serve in all sorts of different capacities. And here in Colorado, as I mentioned, we really have leeway in a lot of different spaces to say, this is what I want or this is what I don't want. So here in Colorado, we can honor your body in 5 ways. And that's with a casket burial, flame cremation, water cremation, human composting, or natural burial. We do not border an ocean, so I'm not going to offer a return to sea, which is legal, and some other things like you can have your body freeze dried and all sorts of things if you have tons of money and you think we can revitalize you years later. But here in Colorado, for the intention of this conversation, there are five. Five's my favorite number, and I think it's really easy because most of us probably have a hand with five fingers. That's casket burial, flame cremation, water cremation, human composting, and natural burial. I'm going to be naturally buried. When I die, my body will be naked. I'll be wrapped in an organic shroud and I'll be put into a hole in the ground, covered up for the earth to consume me, for my body to decompose. And I think those things are really important for people to know because I mentioned a little bit ago, most people say, I wish I would have known this sooner. I had the privilege this week of sitting down with Susan and making her plans, and she is going to be water cremated, and her essence will be returned to the wildlife animal sanctuary through Beatrix cremation. There are four crematories in the Front Range that I would recommend to families, and Beatrix cremation is one of them because of the dignity and the honor and the respect that these individuals hold when they get a loved one into their care. And that's really beautiful. And I thought for a minute, well, what if Susan would have died? And we didn't make these plans. I would have been reverting to her medical power of attorney, whom in these cases, we're thinking of two things, casket or flame cremation. And in this light of climate change and earth destruction, it's important that we have some ideas around how wasteful and how toxic these things can be. I was at a talk recently and there was a picture of a cemetery on the screen. And the gentleman presenting said, "Does anybody know what this is?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, a cemetery." And he said, "No, it's not. It's a toxic wasteland." And that's exactly what most of these cemeteries are. They're toxic wastelands where we forget to give human beings the power of understanding what a burial preserve or what a conservation space should look like. And it becomes an exchange of money. We bury enough metal every year to build the Golden Gate Bridge through casket burials. We embalm bodies every year to fill over 22 Olympic-sized swimming pools of formaldehyde and these toxins that then seep into the ground to really destroy our earth. But here in Western culture, we don't talk about death. And so many of us and many of the people we come across are probably trying to save the earth while we're alive, forgetting that we also too have a choice to give the earth one last opportunity and gift of beauty, and that's disposing of our body in some type of ethical way. And I love to share that because water cremation, human composting, and natural burial are the three greenest options. And in many times, we're just reminding ourselves what we've always done. Natural burial is really the way indigenous peoples and many folks around the world have always honored their loved ones. And there's beautiful different things that people do in Tibetan Buddhism. They will chop up their loved ones and feed them to the birds on the mountaintops as a symbolism of returning their loved ones to the heavens. And there's so many different beautiful ways, but here in America, we are reminding ourselves that we too have autonomy, and it can be done in the form of natural burial, human composting, or water cremation. So I'll talk about those three really briefly, and then I'll go into medical aid in dying, and then I'll open it up for questions. I really could talk all day about this because it really is empowering. It opens up the conversation. Sometimes it makes us a little bit uncomfortable, and I love that because we're learning something new. Water cremation can be done in a few different ways because of the type of machine. And it's hard to use those words when talking about honoring our loved ones, but I found it's easiest just to say what it is. And so for the intention of this conversation and education, I'll be using words that sound a bit more industrial, and that's because they are. In water cremation, there are a few different machines. Bodies are liquefied in anywhere from a 5 to 18-hour process. And that's because people are developing machines to make it happen faster. Many times, families ask me, well, how much liquid do we get back of our loved one? And in Colorado, you have the choice to get all of the liquid back of your loved one, but many times people don't have the capacity to receive it. And that's because I know of one machine of Beatrix cremation that they use. It's 150 gallons, no matter how big or small the body was. It's a standard 150 gallons, which is quite a bit. And I will remind you, if we are what we eat and we come from the earth, our bodies are composed of everything that's found in nature. So though we do test the liquid, and I test the liquid from all the crematories that I work with, what we know is just something that we're being reminded of is that we are made of everything from the earth. And so in that crematory, it's 150 gallons, but I also work with the Natural Funeral out of Boulder. And their water cremation process produces 25 gallons per 100 pounds of flesh. And to make that easier, if you're 100 pounds, you would have 25 gallons of liquid remaining. After the process is complete, the skeleton is dried, it's pulverized, and returned to the family as ashes. And I hear folks say, oh, I've gotten the ashes from flame cremations. And I'll remind you that those are bones. They're pulverized bones in each process. And so it's important to know that as well. And that's water cremation. It's a nutrient dense liquid that you can use on your garden, and you can use in any way that you see fit, as it's a beautiful way to honor your loved one. That's water cremation. And the chemical is an alkali. And, there's anything with moderation, right? If you are a gardener and you are just feeding your plants with compost from the gardening store, your plants are going to get burnt out because it's too nutrient dense. And so people say, well, can you just return as many people as you want to the land there? And the answer is no. And so we go through cycles right now. It's been a few months, actually a little over a year since I've received any liquid from water cremation because I'm giving the land a break here. Changing over to human compost, it's similar to what you do maybe with your grief, or with bodies, is breaking it down so that you can understand it in the way of grief. I like to think about everything in the terms of a garden, because when we're navigating grief, if you can break it down into what you're feeling, you can grow something new with it. But with human composting, it's what we're doing as well. We're breaking down the body to do something new with it. And it's no different than maybe what you would do with your kitchen scraps, banana peels or eggshells. Bodies are placed into a vessel. The Natural Funeral refers to it as a chrysalis, which I think is beautiful because butterflies mean a lot to me. The bodies are placed into this chrysalis for 3 months, with some soil enzymes, native plants, hay, some wood bark, and things of those sorts. The body is nude, and anything that is organic or compostable is welcomed to be placed into the container via the families. And in 3 months, it's a nutrient-dense soil with a skeleton. The skeleton is then pulverized or blended and turned back into the soil for 1 more month. So it's about a 4 month process. And if you are thinking with your business brain, because it's a 4 month process, it's one of the most expensive next to casket burials. So casket burials and human composting are probably the most expensive ways to honor yourself or a loved one. But again, it's a very nutrient dense soil that you can use on your garden. And it's really beautiful. And it's about a truck bed full of soil. And so sometimes families are like, well, we would like all the soil, but they don't have a truck. And again, kind of going back to the water cremation, they just don't have necessarily the capacity to receive it, as you may in flame cremation, where it's just a bag of blended bones. And that's human compost. There is one business or one funeral home that I'm aware of in the state of Colorado that provides that, and that is the Natural Funeral out of Boulder, which I would highly recommend as well. I work very closely with their team, and they're really beautiful. And the last that I'll talk about is natural burial here in Colorado. There is one natural burial preserve, and that is the Colorado Burial Preserve, founded by Emily, an incredible person in Florence, Colorado, who offers green burials, no embalmed bodies, no caskets, nothing of the sort, strictly a nude body into the ground as a way to regenerate the earth there. And it's really a beautiful process. So many people say, well, I want that too, but I already have a burial plot at this local cemetery. And I say, get curious, give them a call. Hi, my name is so and so. I want to be naturally buried, and I already have a plot with you. Is this something that you allow? And it opens up the conversation for education. On a call yesterday, I'm working on getting a loved one's body from Kansas to Colorado. And the Kansas funeral director said, we cannot release this body until we have a funeral director in Colorado. It was a wonderful opportunity for education because Colorado is the only state out of the 50 where you do not have to hire a funeral director in order to care for your loved one after they die. All of you listening can designate yourself as a funeral director today, and you can take on the liabilities of what that would look like for your loved one. And so I am working on educating Kansas and Kansas funeral homes on what the laws are in Colorado so that we can work together in getting the loved one from Kansas back to Colorado, where that individual will be buried on private property, which is also legal. However, you need to check with the county and the municipality and the coroner's office where you live on privately owned property in order to do that, which is important to note as well. So get curious about your burial options, contact your local cemeteries and ask them questions. And I'm going to shift over just into medical aid in dying. And again, if anything's coming up for you question wise, pop those into the chat, and or you can take yourself off mute in a few minutes, and we'll make sure we'll get those answered. And these are stories from my experience as well. So if there's something you would love to educate me on, I'm open to receiving. Two of the biggest areas that some confetti, awesome. Two of the biggest areas that I am very passionate about is medical aid in dying and voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. In June, I will be hosting a half day here at the farm to dive more into those topics. And so you can find that class resource and join me at the farm in May or in June if that's something that you're curious about. But I'm so passionate about people having choice and autonomy when faced with a terminal illness. There are 11 districts, Washington, D.C. being one of them, in the United States of America that allow you to consume a lethal cocktail so your heart can stop and you can transition when faced with a terminal illness. I'm going to speak to Colorado's laws because those are the ones I'm most familiar with. And again, medical aid in dying is up for change as well. There's a 15-day waiting period in between the times that you can get your medications, and we're looking at changing that to 48 hours. But here in Colorado, if you are over the age of 18 and of sound mind, you have a terminal illness that's 6 months or less, because terminal is not always 6 months or less. Terminal, 6 months or less, you can apply to get medications to end your life. And there's so much education that needs to happen in this area. I'm now working with UC Health to educate them on what meds they should be giving, because there are some meds that take a bit longer than other meds. And it's an important space to really discover and question, because the MDs who are doing the conversations and the prescribing to the pharmacists are not present upon ingestion. And so unfortunately, they're relying on death doulas and a lot of individuals in the communities for that data and understanding how long did it take for this person, and also understanding that everybody's different. But in Colorado, there's 3 things that need to happen. There's first a form that you need to fill out and send into the state saying, my name is so-and-so. I understand that I have a terminal illness and I'm looking to apply to get medications to end my life. And then you will have 2 physician's appointments. by two different physicians, both of which can be done via telehealth. And I've sat in many of these conversations, and they're quick. I would say 5 to 10 minutes. And that what the doctor's looking for is that this patient understands what they're asking for. I've also sat on some tragic situations where individuals were denied their medications because the doctor didn't see that they were understanding of what was going to happen. There's a 15-day waiting period from when you get your first physician's appointment to the last one. And that is really to make sure that you understand the gravity of the situation and what you are requesting. And on the 15th day, you will have, if it's your choice, that final physician's appointment, and you will be able to get the medication most of the time that afternoon. And what I'm finding is that a physician does not have to support your choice. They can say, I do not support this and I am out. And that is something to be aware of, because if you have a primary care physician of 35 years and they're saying, I'm out, where do you go? You can contact Regeneration Earth for a list of physicians who will support your choice and who will advocate on behalf of what your decisions are. But it's important to know that, because your physician, though they have been with you for many, many, many years, maybe, they do not have to support your choice, and that is their business. However, that does not mean that you should not pursue autonomy. And that's where you can reach out to many different resources here in Colorado to understand what access can look like to finding a physician that will support you in that. And there's so many different, from a medical standpoint, there's so many different cocktails. Some of them have the same ingredients, but some of them are different. And so what I'm looking at now in my experience of over 75 MAID individuals in my care is knowing, I know which medications work. And I know which medications are effective. And I also know which medications take a little bit longer. And so I'm hoping that if this is an individual's choice, we can have maybe a standard recipe for medical aid in dying medications so that we can honor that individual. And I believe that's autonomy and important. And then the last thing that I'll mention briefly is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Voluntarily stopping eating and drinking is legal in all 50 states. It is your right. However, if you are in a facility or a care home that is federally regulated, your wishes may not be honored. And I'll give you an example. Many elders choose to stop eating and drinking as a way to hasten death. But what happens is on day 3 or 4, they become a little bit more delusional because their bodies are beginning to shut down. And they may say something like, I'm thirsty. And if they look at their nurse and they say, I'm thirsty, the nurse will say, would you like some water? And they will hand over the water, and that individual begin drinking again and hydrating. And as a death doula, what I do know is food and water is not necessary at the end of life. In fact, it can prolong suffering and it can prolong life when the individual does not want that. And so I think as family members and caregivers, I see sometimes, and I can imagine my mother in this scenario, oh, well, let's give them more water because they want to relieve this perceived suffering, when in fact, continuing to hydrate or nourish an individual can actually prolong that space. So when they're in a private residence, their wishes can be honored. Their wishes can be honored, and you can remind the individual, your choice was to stop eating and drinking. Is this still your choice? And it's also important to get clear before that journey on what that individual wants. I've sat with many folks involuntarily stopping eating and drinking, and it is so important to get very clear on what that is before the process begins so that their wishes can be honored. And I do that in a lot of different spaces. And I will rest assured that there's a lot of conversation that happens. This isn't something that's done quickly. There's a lot of listening involved. Their families are involved. Their caregivers are involved, whomever that may be. Their Western practitioners, whether it's their primary care physician, are involved. If they're on hospice, we get everybody involved. in a very private, intimate setting so that we can understand what that individual's wishes are, so that as a team, we can honor that all. And there are so many different spaces for education in voluntarily stopping eating and drinking and medical aid in dying, such as my dad has cancer in Illinois. Is he eligible for Colorado's medical aid in dying law? And the answer is no, unless he is a resident. And he can become a resident very easily through a few different things in the name of autonomy. And so I would encourage everybody, if you have a loved one in another state or you're working with a family in another state, that just because they are there in that state, it's not the end of the road. Get curious, ask questions, look out for resources and different things in the state that can support you, and make a phone call to me. Call individuals who you believe can be supported. And yeah, so I can talk all day about this, and I know I just kind of scraped the surface on a lot of these topics, and I'm going to go through, and I see they changed, made, or passed in both the House and Senate, and they're just awaiting the governor's signature. I'm excited to look through what those changes have been. And I agree, the End of Life Options Colorado is a wonderful plethora of resources for folks to seek out when they're looking for support in primary care physicians or folks like that.
Sigrid, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I'd just like to add, because I'm a fellow end-of-life doula, Eric, and I'd love to connect with you personally and privately. I'm also on the board of End of Life Options, so I'm familiar with everything you said. And the changes that have passed are two. One is the waiting period of 15 days. That's come down to 5 days and can be waived in certain circumstances. And the other one, and that's a big one, is that nurse practitioners can now prescribe the meds with that check. I know, big
Raise the
big
roof.
move.
That is
I know.
autonomy. That is
I
autonomy. And
So
I know that you have worked so hard in that education. And so thank you for being a light in this space and being able to speak for those who can't. And I thank you for that. As I know that a lot of the work that you do, as I've seen you across different spaces, is educating and fighting for what is right. So thank you.
that's what we're all about, and we are gearing up to more education of the nurse practitioners. But yeah, so that's coming. And even if the governor doesn't sign, and I think that is important for everyone here to understand, if he doesn't sign, the law will automatically go into effect, I think, in August. That's just the way these things work.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have direct access to Jared Polis, and so if there is a way that you think that would benefit this signature, please reach out, and I can get in front of him very quickly.
Let's connect.
Okay. And Jenna, regarding funeral directors change in Colorado, yes. Yes, that will potentially change with new legislation, and it will require you to pay money to take classes and certifications in order for you to be a funeral director. And also from the family side, it will require you to work with a funeral director in order to honor your loved one, which means dying becomes more expensive. And this is the reason why I'm against this right now. This really came to light and started ruffling feathers because of the mishandling of decedents in Penrose, and more specifically with Apollo Funeral Home just a few months ago. And I want to remind everybody, Colorado's not unique in this. There is a lot of darkness in the death and dying space, no matter where you're at. Colorado just seems to get the light. The only way to make sure that your loved one is being cared for appropriately is to be involved and to ask questions from A to Z throughout the entire process. That is the way that you can be sure the funeral home is caring for your loved one. So no matter what the law is, and no matter really what funeral home you're working with, darkness and evil can happen anywhere. The only way we can avoid that is by being present and being a part of our loved one's process after they die from A to Z and asking questions beforehand. Where's my loved one going to be? Are they in a refrigerator? Can you tell me the exact location of that refrigerator? How long will they be in that refrigerator? Can I see them be put into the machine? Um, are you going to take the clothes off of them when they go into your refrigerator? These types of questions, you have the right to know. So I'm a bit nervous about that legislation changing because it really comes down to money and not autonomy. But money and changing and charging people to get certifications is not necessarily going to change the space. Colorado's not unique. We could expose funeral homes coast to coast. But Colorado's getting the limelight and what it does in a lot of different ways. And I think it's because we are the most autonomous. I have no doubt that's going to be changing because as human beings, we think that there's safety in that requirement of a certification. And unfortunately, there's just not. The only way you can be assured of the safety is to be a part of your loved one's journey from A to Z and asking questions beforehand of the funeral home and who will be caring for your loved one as well. I know of many wonderful funeral directors, and I also don't think it's necessary to honor your loved one in the best way, though they can provide you so much wonderful education. And in many ways, it's important. I also love autonomy. And with the family I'm working with specifically yesterday, they don't want to have to pay for a funeral director. They want to bury their loved one in their backyard without a funeral director. And I don't believe that anybody has the right to say that's a good idea or that's not. If you have private land, it's really beautiful to be able to offer that space in so many different ways. So thank you for that question, Jenna. But yes, that is potentially going to be changing. And this is where we can get together and understand what is good and what isn't. And we can use our voices to say, wait a minute, this is what's important and this is not. I am not for the costs of dying going up. I'm only for them coming down. Because I hear and hear so many stories of people saying, my dad would have wanted this, but we couldn't afford it. And this is happening now. Get curious about what they do with people experiencing houselessness and where their bodies go. I called the medical examiner's office and I asked, and Lauren had no idea. And that's a cause for concern. What are we doing with all these bodies and why? If there's a reason why, I can get behind it. But let's get curious about a space where we can give the most love and autonomy to our loved ones and our community members and returning them to the earth without the cost.
Eric, I have two questions. One was posed by someone who wasn't able to make it today. And you educated me on this, but I'd like to pose it for the group and anybody who may see this on recording. The question was regarding body composting and water cremation and the concern that if they were to use those in a garden or something like that, genetics or, anything like that. And you educated me on this space, but I'd love to just open that question up for this recording and for the group here, if you don't mind speaking on that.
Sure. So water cremation, it is a sterile liquid when it comes out. And so it is from all intents and purposes, safe to use on things that are for consumption. I have a lot of opinions about this because what the FDA currently approves to be on our grocery store shelves that we know is causing cancer and is causing a lot of other dis-ease are really things that we should be raising our voices about. So water cremation, it is a sterile solution. I have used it on food that I have consumed myself. I'm not interested in using that on publicly sold foods because I just don't want to get into other people's ethics. And yes, there is no DNA in the essence from that. And so you would never be able to trace it back to the individual. Now, human composting, there is one problem, and that is mad cow disease. So it is not safe, apparently, to be using human compost on food for consumption because we may not know the gravity of that soil until it's too late. And in human compost, there is hair that does not compost as quickly as other things. So at different intervals, in theory, you could identify parts of that soil via the hair to the individual. So essence from water cremation, in my opinion, is safe to use on things for consumption. Human composting, in my opinion, is not safe to be used on things for human consumption. But flowers and other beautiful parts of your garden, it would be wonderfully beneficial. And I also would like to remind people that when bodies are autopsied, they drain human blood into city water. And so there's so many different gaps in end of life that we need to be raising concern about. We can talk about compost and essence, but I think there's a few steps back we can take about the ethics behind the grossness, or what is it going to cause, or what's going to happen to make it a system of whole care. I do care about essence, and I do care about human compost, but there's many other things in the death and dying space that I believe that we can begin to raise concern and awareness about, such as human blood into city water, that we could probably begin to understand a little bit more. So I hope that answered your question. Compost, I'm not using on edibles. Liquid, for my own personal consumption and house plants and things like that, yes, but yeah, there's no DNA in the essence, whereas in the compost with the hair, in theory, you could test that DNA and find out.
Thank you for answering that. And my second question is, we have an amazing group of folks here today. I know we have people in the doula space, the legal space, financial space, in grief therapy space. So a lot of professionals who are supporting people and families in their times of need. And what would you say if they are approached by that family or feel empowered in a sense to have these conversations with those folks? What you've mentioned that Regeneration Earth obviously is a great resource. Sigrid mentioned End of Life Options Colorado. What would be some action steps that these professionals could take to better educate themselves and better educate the people that they're serving in this space?
I think it is to, if they're a business owner or if they work in a group, it's to first educate everybody so that they're on the same page. Because passing a family who's grieving off to this person, and oh, that's a great question, let me go ahead and find this out, it becomes emotionally exhausting. And so what I envision are businesses and individuals who are educated, and it could just be on surface level stuff. They're educated in some type of spectrum to be able to speak to each topic, and addendums to dementia care, and medical aid in dying, and individuals who can say, hey, this is great, and I love all these wills and stuff, but let's role play in a few different situations so that we can make sure we're documenting everything. Because dementia, I learned a lot about last week, dementia is very common. I spoke to an undergraduate class of 86, and I said, how many of you either yourself or know somebody who has been diagnosed with cancer or dementia? 100%. 100% of that crowd. And so it's important that in your business or in your practice that you're educated so that you can speak to some of these things. I like role playing. I've thought about doing some theater stuff, but it's important to think, and I put myself in their shoes. If I have dementia and I am no longer able to feed or hydrate myself, please do not. Just keep me comfortable. And if you're an attorney, it would be important to educate your clients on creating an addendum that would allow you that legal right so that you can be protected and kept comfortable. But I think many times we're thinking about other things. And so what I would say is bring me in to educate you and your group. Bring another professional in. There are so many educators here along the Front Range that can support you in your business. And get curious. Talk to other individuals about what their experiences are and what they wish would have been different. And this is the way that we can do things together. So I think education is just so important, and to embody that, because I think so many times in businesses, we're selling products. I'm not selling you athletic wear. You are going to die. And so if I think we can put that hat on and say, oh crap, oh God, okay, this is not something I'm just helping them out with. This is something I also have to embody. This is for all of us. Then we can say, I would want that too. I would want an attorney who can talk to me through an addendum in creating an addendum specifically that mentioned dementia. I would want an attorney who would say and be educated on what human composting is. Because when I say, oh, there's only two options, casket or flame cremation, let's go ahead and document it. It would be really nice if the attorney or the planner or whomever you're working with said, actually, here in Colorado, there's 5 options. Because I think you're going to choose probably the last 3 that we talked about. And so I think it's just so important. And in fact, if we are not educated, I think we're doing our families a disservice from not doing our jobs as leaders in this space. And so get curious, find an individual that you can learn from and learn alongside. I love learning too, so I'd love to be taught about what y'all do in the appropriate setting. But just get curious and ask questions and embody that. If I'm paying $6,000 for a comprehensive end-of-life planning package, I hope that individual is educated on medical aid in dying, voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, and greener burial practices. If not, I think you have some education to do, and that is the right of the individuals which you are serving and exchanging money for. You want to give them that whole care. And of course, they will choose, but making sure that they understand the options is really important. It's the law. It's informed consent.
That's great. Thank you so much. I know we're coming up on our time here, so I want to open it up one last time for any questions verbally or in the chat box that anybody might have before we wrap up.
Eric, would you mind to share your contacts?
Sure, I will pop that into the chat.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Eric, are there any final words that you would like to share with us or the group other than, and I'll just say really quick, thank you so much. This was incredibly informative. I appreciated your life experiences that have led you to share the stories. I loved hearing the story of Susan in her final weekend, and just grateful for everything that you're doing in this space and for the community here in Colorado and beyond. So thank you from me, and I'm sure from everyone else here.
Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, and I really mean that. This is not Chick-fil-A. It is my true pleasure. What is on my heart that I want to share is we need to lead with love in this space. And that is not through silence. That is through using our voices to be able to share what we believe is equal, it is justified, and it is dignified. And so I would encourage you to feel what it would be like to open up your throat to be able to say, that doesn't feel right to me. Is there a different way we can do this? Or when you're hiring somebody, are you educated on green burials? I'd love to learn more about that. Being courageous in this space where many of us grew up in Western culture where we have to play with the words of death and dying. We don't know how to say it or how to ask. And so my final words are, autonomy requires you to speak up. And so we need to speak up. And I feel that something's brewing in society, and we need something to change, not only with death, but other things. And I would like to stay focused on death. And so speak up. I'm here to support you. I will love with you, and I will love on you when you need support. And it might feel a little bit tricky sometimes to advocate for these things. Intuitively, you know what is right and you know what is wrong. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. I'm here to support you. I have your back. I hope you have mine, because I will die too. And lead with love. If you can remind yourself that you're coming from a place of love, we have the right to speak up. We have the right to say, this doesn't feel right. I would like to work with another funeral home or another doula or another attorney. That is your right. And don't feel discouraged to speak up and to use your voice. Now is the time.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. Thank you to everyone who joined us this morning. Again, really appreciate it. Eric shared his information in the chat. I think you all received an email from me last night, and that email is a great space to contact me if you'd like anything further. But again, Eric, so appreciative of your time and look forward to continuing these conversations with the people that we all serve and our friends and family.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.